Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Upside. I'm Jonathan Oleski with JMOR, and our show today is about to begin. It's my pleasure to introduce our two wonderful co-hosts, Beth Goldsmith, Chair of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore, and Dr. Scott Rifkin, publisher of JMOR. Beth and Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan, and welcome again, everyone, to our virtual show brought to you by the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore and JMOR Magazine to help keep our Baltimore Jewish community informed during these times of uncertainty. Today, our guest is going to help us with something I think we've all been struggling with, as we're about to enter our 6th month of dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, I should say. Many of us are struggling with stress in ways that are truly impacting our health. We know that stress can lead to physical ailments, from heart disease to diabetes, and we also know it can take a real toll on our mental health. In fact, the CDC recently reported a disturbing new finding. 25% of young adults have actually considered taking their lives during this pandemic. Today's guest will talk about this new stress we're facing, how it is impacting us, and hopefully provide us with some mechanisms to help us cope. Scott, please introduce our guest.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you. I usually get on this show about 5 or 10 minutes early. I go on about 7 seconds before the broadcast started. And now you hear my dog in the front doorbell going off. So I do apologize. What is a Zoom meeting today without a dog, a doorbell, or a naked child running across the screen? So Howard, thank you for joining us today. Howard's title is Manager of Prevention Services at Associated Jewish Community Services. And I've got this long paragraph explaining what you do and what prevention services are. And it would sound very scripted if I read it. So what I'd rather, Howard, you do is tell us what you do. Explain all that to us.
Yeah, well, first off, before I respond, I really want to give my honor to you, Scott, and to you, Beth. This morning after services, the rabbi gave a little bit of a talk, and he said the following, and I thought about, I was going to be introduced to Beth. Person who gives charity, that's like a really amazing thing. Higher than that is someone who goes about getting other people to give to charities. So Beth, you are considered, as well as all the legions of people at the Associated, on that very, very high level. Not only do you give, but getting other people to give, which is no easy task. And Scott, this program and JMOR and contributing to the distribution of health, factual-based information is very, very important. Back to your question. What is it that I do all day? My kids used to ask that. So at JCS, JCS does a lot of different things, very helpful to the community at large. The piece that I'm currently involved in is prevention education. We are a handful of health educators who go out to the communities, to schools, to Hadassah, to sisterhoods, brotherhoods, whoever will take us. And we give over information and practice and ideas on how we all can contribute to each other's mental health. So we go into the private schools, the public schools, the Jewish schools, talking about sex, drugs, rock and roll, and lately a whole lot about resiliency. How can we all deal with this really challenging time that we're living in? So that, in a nutshell, yeah. Thank you, Scott, for that question.
So we'll get to the pandemic in a minute, but I really want to get more background on what you and your group does. So what you really mentioned was a list of risky behaviors.
Correct.
How does mental health integrate with risky behavior? And how do you get involved in helping a young person work through that whole series of available behaviors, because it's out there for them?
Yeah.
At the same time, they're trying to grow up and be accepted and all the other emotional things that go through your mind when you're 10, 11, 13, 15 years old.
Beautiful. That's the task in front of the health educators that I am honored to work with. Usually I handle the adults, and in some ways they're easier or harder. With the challenges of adolescence is a crazy time. So we help normalize the discomfort, the challenge of fitting in. It's a time when kids are leaving security of family and those values, and then now going out into the world, the beginning forays, the first couple attempts at doing that. So we really start off in the younger ages, not so much talking about drugs and all that stuff, but really, what does it take to build up a sense of self, healthy self-esteem, finding your area of competence and confidence coming from that, and building on that so you have less of a need to go out and fill that void or to take unnecessary risks just to quote unquote fit in. So the challenges are there. We try to, as best we can, ally with the teenagers saying, yeah, this is a tough time. And what are the issues that you're dealing with? And let's look collectively how you can manage these difficult changes in your life.
Is there a difference between the teenager who is doing these things to get along and fit in versus the teenager with really deep psychological issues, and that becomes a symptom of them?
Yeah. So what we do is go into classrooms. So our purview is the challenge of adolescence. And we know that within that group, you're going to have anywhere from 10 to 20% of the kids who are going to be dealing with kind of much more deeper issues. We work hand in glove with the teachers, with the administrators, and most of the schools in this day and age, it wasn't true 15, 20 years ago when we were the ones, JCS, were going in and supplying the clinical help. Now, nearly I'd say every school that we are involved in has their own set of social workers, clinicians there to help those who are indeed struggling at this deeper level. And or we've got, in Jewish Community Services, we have a very capable staff that focuses on working with children and their families.
Beth?
Yeah, I want to jump in. Thank you so much. And thank you for your remarks at the beginning. I will say, I have to say my work with the Associated has really been more of a gift to me, particularly when we talk about stress. I have such reason to be and such a great life during this horrific time because of my involvement with the community. So it's an unbelievable blessing and gift to me as well. And I thank you for your kind words. So can you talk a little bit, I'm going to go up the age group a little bit, for people who don't even know exactly what it is they're feeling. How is stress manifesting itself in our daily lives? And what are some of the ways perhaps we can cope with it?
Yeah. So probably if we were to interview everybody on this show right now, if I asked, how are you sleeping? How are you eating these days? Do you feel more stressed than you did a year ago this time, or more anxious, or more challenged? And in what ways are you experiencing that physically? People could come up with at least one way and directly connect that. The bottom line is, us human beings, like our brains are connected to the rest of our body, and our bodies are connected to our brains. We are really one whole unit. So even when, quote unquote, my thoughts are making me stressful or stressed, they are going to affect the body. Simple example. When back in the day when you used to go into a movie theater, remember that? You used to go into a movie theater. We walked in, sat down, we knew that this was a movie, right? However, 5 minutes later on the screen is a scene that like really comes at you. Well, you go like this. You feel your heart palpitating because there's danger, whatever. We physically feel that, and we walk in knowing. Our brain knows it's a movie. Our brain knows that these guys and gals are acting. So what quote unquote just is in my head affects the body. The biggest thing on the web is pornography. It's 2 dimensions. It's not real. They're acting, but put someone down in front of it and you're going to start feeling stuff. So turn on the news. It's going to affect the body. We may not realize it, and one of the techniques is called body scanning. So a lot of the techniques we teach for adults and also for kids really come out of mindfulness. And that comes out from the research done, University of Massachusetts, John Kabat-Zinn, a 1-minute description. He opened up his clinic at University of Massachusetts and said to the entire medical staff, send me your most anxious people, the folks who keep coming in with these physical ailments and just for the life of you don't know what's going on, people who are facing the end of their lives, send them to me, to my clinic. It was an anxiety clinic. And he taught a number of different techniques. And he had rather amazing success. Hence, it's 20, 30 years later, and mindfulness is all over like McDonald's is all over. What we found, one of the exercises called body scanning, and that is an exercise where we quiet the mind, like I'm doing now, and just observing, noticing the different physical sensations of the body and just noticing them. And in that process, there's a quietness, and we come to some painful places and we just hold those painful places in a loving place. And that going through that body scan. And people tend to walk away from those sessions, maybe not in any less pain, but with less suffering. There's one thing to experience pain, it's another to be suffering with it. I can perhaps hold the pain and do what I need to do. If you ever watch kids who, quote unquote, are disabled, well, the kid, is doing whatever the kids do and schlepping along whatever their disability is. They may be disabled, but they're not disabling themselves. They may feel pain or limitations, but they are pushing and living in some ways more fully than you and I. So taking all this wisdom and applying it to us kind of regular adults who are dealing with, these are pretty stressful times.
So let's jump into what's happening right now. You've got a pandemic. We're all sort of isolated in our homes. There are various levels of risk that different people have. And for teenagers who live and die by social interaction with their peers, this is even harder. For people like me, I can go hide from the world, and I kind of like it. I have to admit.
There's some good stuff to this.
Brain dead like I am is actually a plus sometimes,
Yeah.
But for a teenager, I remember what those years were like. My life was not centered around school. It was centered around the people at school. It was centered about what I was doing on Thursday night or Friday night. It was not, how are young folks, particularly teenagers, dealing with the pandemic, A, and B, how are you guys getting involved in helping them?
Okay, on the first question, I think it's a mixed bag, a mixed response. I'll tell you the pluses first, and then the minuses you articulated very well. The pluses is they have, depending on the age of the kid, anywhere from 10 to 20 to 23 years head start than us three that are talking today, as far as being in the digital age, right? They knew already how to have relatively significant relationships using these vehicles, using the cell phone, using video chats, they were way ahead of us. We adults kind of poo-pooed and said, you can't have a real relationship that way. That continues to be true. However, they had a head start on making these mediums work as best as these mediums could. So on the one hand, they were hyper connected without being in person. So they had a jump on these things. The negative, as you articulated well, it's a time to connect socially, and also a time to connect, whether we like it or not, physically. And so part of the thing is, used to be if two people were attracted to each other, the issue of protection had to do with prophylactics. Now it's prophylactics plus do we wear masks or not? And of course the answer is no. If I want to get to know you, even though, and okay, 6 feet apart, so there's a lot of risk. And I think the frustration that we feel about should I or shouldn't I go out into the public now was much more of an issue for teenagers and young adults. And all those questions, all those decisions to be made that now that, it's partially opening, we're making, should I go to the store? Should I not go to the store? Should I go make a Shiva call? Or, all those things, they had to deal with it with much more urgency, with psychological urgency, with emotional urgency. And so a lot of stress, a lot of depression, and for some, really difficulty coping and coming in the form of suicidal ideations.
So I would imagine.
How do we connect? With difficulty, with challenges. Challenge for us is most of our work is through schools, and the schools, when this thing hit, were in very much disarray. So mental health, unfortunately, took a back seat because they were so focused on the reading, writing, arithmetic, because that's what they get paid for. So that's been a real challenge. And we pivoted as quickly as possible and successfully to doing things virtually. So now we offer Zoom programming. A lot of what we used to do in person, we've transformed into Zoom. One of our workers who was, her beat was Reisterstown, Maryland. She's done the best that she could to go into the virtual worlds of the kids and their usually moms to continue to be a resource for them. But yeah, it's made our intervening much more challenging, but we accept the challenge because that's what we're here for. That's the latest block between us getting healthy messages to teenagers and them being able to receive it.
So
one of the most interesting things, sorry, Scott, one of the most interesting things I've heard about your work is the idea of tapping into the wisdom of Holocaust survivors for lessons to help us with coping. Would you share a little more about that?
Yeah. For better or for worse, as a people, we have a lot of experience with adversity and coping with adversity, surviving, and like our life in America and in Israel now, thriving. Despite the most unimaginable adversities, we have a very rich tradition. A rich tradition dating back to King David and the writing of Psalms. King David, just a brief, he was thought to be an illegitimate child. He was thought by his father, and he was not allowed to live in the main house. And when the prophet came to say, you got a king, the next king living in this house, and they said, well, not you, you must have another son. Yeah, he lives in the barn. Well, that was King David Amelech. And so you have all of Psalms about his facing adversity. Not only that, when he's king, his main threat is one of his sons is trying to kill him and take over. Like, how bad can that get? You know, we have trouble with our kids. You know, he had trouble. Fast forwarding it to the Holocaust. I've always been fascinated, like, how in the world did you deal with that? And I grew up, as some of us grew up, with neighbors, people we went to shul with, friends of family who were survivors. And so a curiosity in me, how, my biggest worry, which for me is like a 10 used to be a final exam or, but like, so anything I can learn from it. One of the main secular Jewish books of wisdom about surviving the Holocaust, most of us have heard about, it's called Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And I am in no way an authority on Viktor Frankl. There are people in town, Dr. Levinson, for one, had the chance to spend a lot of time with Viktor Frankl at the end of his life. And if you want the inside scoop, you can ask him. What I've taken away from Viktor Frankl's work is the following. Having a purpose, a global purpose. I'm on this planet not just to consume hamburgers, though I really like hamburgers, but I'm on this planet to do something. Each of us has a mission. We may not be clear what it is, but it's something to leave the world a better place than when I found it. Have a global mission. And for him, it was, I need to stay alive to keep my family when this is all over, to help my family, my wife and my kids. So that was his global mission for survival. Second thing I took away from his book is he had a day-to-day mission. He knew that in the camps, when things got to be too much, people would run to the fence and off themselves. He saw it as his job to try to convince people not to run to the fence, but try to stay as focused on staying alive as possible. So he was trying to keep sane in hell. And so he had a day-to-day mission. That was his job. When he got up in the morning, that's what he assigned himself to do, besides all the physical labor that they had to do in the camps. Third, so having a daily purpose. Third thing I took away from the book was self-care. There was one spot, only one that he could find in the entire camp, where he could sneak off to that the guard towers couldn't see him. And that was behind the latrines. And you can imagine how it was behind the latrines. Plus, that's where behind the latrines, the people who died the day before and that night, that's where they kept the dead bodies. Sorry to be so frank. However, it was there that he could stay for a couple of minutes and not be afraid of being shot because he was, quote unquote, doing nothing in the camp. And if he hit the timing right, that's where sunshine would come through the trees. So he would sneak off to that place, that little bit of sunshine, that shaft of light, luxuriate in it for a minute. This day and age, it might be a bubble bath, it might be listening to a piece of music, whatever it is for you. For him, it was that shaft of light. And then fourth was between stimulus and response. A famous idea of his, the quote, whether it was his or not, in question. Mammals, animals, stimulus, response, boink, that's it. Dog sees squirrel run, dog runs. No decision making, it's like automatic. Cat sees dogs, again, if they don't know each other. Cat runs, dog goes after. Human being, is there something else between stimulus and response? And that is the human mind and our ability to decide how we are going to respond to the situation. His quote is, the Nazis may take away all the stimulus, expecting the response. I'm going to act like an animal, but my response, I'm going to choose. Now, the caveat to the story, even though his larger purpose, he didn't know they'd all been killed off already. His larger purpose, even though it wasn't actual, it was enough to get him to survive. And he created this school of logotherapy. More answer than probably you asked for, but I think we can glean from those people who had to deal with the extremes, how to deal with our situations. I've learned a lot when I've worked in prisons. How do people who are confined for years on end, how do they deal with stuff? When I worked in hospital settings, people dealing with cancer and long-term physical ailments, how do they deal with stuff? It really informs my work, and I like to share it because I think it is a fountain of wisdom. And unfortunately, we have many such, much of that wisdom in our tradition and in our experience.
So Howard, thank you. And that was really a well thought out answer. So I thought it was great. You were worried it went too long and you referenced that, but no, not at all. That was really a very helpful answer. You're involved with lots of kids and lots of adults through the group of people that work with you. What's actually happening out there? Are we seeing more kids with suicidal ideation or action? Are we seeing more depression? Or give me an overview of what your department is seeing.
Okay, I wish I could speak more clearly for the clinicians who are working with the kids. Communication is challenging, and again, I work at prevention. But my source is, because your question is a $100 question, or $64,000 with inflation. I pulled this from the CDC because I was interested too. In addition to what Beth said, 25% of young adults reported suicidal thoughts in the prior 3 months. There's also a limited amount of data yet on uptake in drug and alcohol use. However, the data that is so far trickled in about overdoses is that in most of the country, it's increasing, the amount of overdoses during lockdown. According to this, anxiety and depression, 31% reported having an anxiety or depressive symptoms in the month prior, and this was done, I think, a month ago. Trauma or stress-related disorders, 26%. 13% started or increased their use of substances, and overall 11%, meaning that kids and adults, seriously considered suicide. And I believe the quote-unquote normal rate overall is about 8%. So what this says to me is the kids are having a tougher time. I assume it's sort of like, you know, the first time you lose your job, or the first time your girlfriend breaks up with you, your boyfriend breaks up with you, versus, you know, it's the third time, or the third time you've lost a job. It isn't your first rodeo. So one, you know you're going to survive it. And even though it's very, very painful, you call on some of the resources that worked the first time or the second time, or you've matured now that it's a little bit later on your life, and you have a little bit broader of a view that this is not quite the end of the world. Youngsters don't have that history. And as much as we want to give them our own history, oh, I went through that, I survived it, I ended up marrying your mother, and it was the best decision. You know, it didn't work for us when we were the kids. It really doesn't work so well. The best thing we can do is, yup, I hear your pain, and yup, it is painful. Thankfully, this will pass. And until then, you know, I feel bad that it's painful. I'm here and listening with you.
I would imagine that the worst pain in the world is for the parent who misses the signs. And that child goes on, and unfortunately, suicides do occur. And then to feel later that you should have noticed, or you should have responded differently because maybe you could have prevented it. So what should a parent be looking for?
change in behavior, which is pretty tough considering we've all changed our behaviors in the last couple of months. Change in sleep pattern, eating pattern, change in just daily routine. However, once again, for anybody who has a teenager or adolescent at home during this time, the question is, have they changed from their night pajamas to their day pajamas? So it's really tough to tell in this.
Me too. So that's a problem.
You're looking great though.
You only see me from the waist.
From hair up, yeah.
Right.
Did you hear the statistic? The amount of clothes, trousers during the first couple of months, sales from really decreased, but shirts and tops increased. What's that all about? But back to your more serious question. I think when the parent consistently makes it okay for family members to talk about thoughts and feelings. It's just like in sex ed, it isn't one conversation. It's okay to talk about these things. It was okay back here, it's okay here, it's okay here. And so that means us parents being a little bit more vulnerable and not necessarily telling them all about our angst, but somehow communicating that, yes, these are tough times and this is my challenge and this is what I'm doing and this is how I get my support. Being a little bit more see-through about it and keeping our ears open. These conversations more have to do with our ears than our mouths. That our children, and it's really hard, especially my boys, like, we're closed books, my girls much more open. And that's the way it is. And so that requires a lot of prayer and continuing to give the message that I'm here to listen. I'm not going to jump down your throat. I'm not going to panic. We do offer something called QPR, which is really addressed to this very topic. It's a 1 hour program that we do, and we can do it via Zoom. It's called Question, Persuade, Refer. Question, when we pick up in language or something, are you thinking about killing yourself? Which is a different question, thinking about hurting yourself. You think about killing yourself. Have you thought about it in the past couple of months? I read this statistic, 25%. Is that true of 25% of your friends? So engaging in conversation, making it part of ongoingness is, I think, the best tool. So that, again, that open communication.
So let's say you pick up a warning sign. Your kid says something to you that makes you concerned. How does that family reach out to Jewish Community Services for help?
Telephone, 410-466-9200. And pretty quickly you get in touch with a clinician who can help you decipher, is this teenage angst? At least our best guess. Your kids, is this just teenage angst? Or is this something that perhaps needs more attention? If you find on their social media clear indications that they are thinking about ending their lives, jump on it. If you start noticing in language, oh, I'd rather be dead than in this house for another month. Again, talk about that. Curiousness, inquisitiveness, and directness. And it's really literally a phone call away. Even during the height of the lockdown, a phone call away. And if it's after hours, you'll get a message to phone Grassroots, which is a 24-hour hotline. And Grassroots has been around specifically for this purpose since I was in grad school, and that was like 40 some years ago. Expertise there.
Give that number again, Howard.
JCS 410-466-9200. And what's about to happen nationwide, 988 is going to be, if it hasn't started this week, 988, like 911, 988 puts you in touch with the suicide hotline. So if you're a concerned parent and you want to know, should I really be concerned, you have a consultation right there. So I checked 2 weeks ago. It hasn't started yet, but it's about to start if it didn't this week. 988.
Howard, while we're giving people ways to connect, and thank you again for sharing the hotline number. We've shared it for other reasons throughout this pandemic. You mentioned some virtual programming, and if there are any others that you'd like to tout, and particularly tell people how to connect with all the virtual programming that is happening.
Yeah. So go to JCS, jcs.org, Baltimore. Just Google it and you'll go to the landing site and you'll see our virtual programs. Giving you some idea what's coming up in the very near future, though I don't have the dates memorized in my head. There's going to be another community-wide memorial program in close connection with Lebanon.
Now, I'm going to actually mention that at the end of the show.
All right.
We're on the same page.
Very good. Is in the second week of September, there's going to be a program on the lessons we've learned about addiction and recovery during lockdown. It's called Addiction During Restrictions, Families Struggling During the Time of COVID. There's going to be a collection of parents, of people who are struggling and not struggling. You can tune into that. Again, it'll be on the website. The following week, mid-September, we're doing one and that's also with Levinson and the Samet family and the Karp family as sponsors and Bethel Synagogue. So that should be, I'd say a sellout crowd, but on Zoom, that's 1,000 plus. Also, 2 weeks afterwards, it's called Of Substance, and that's going to be with Stoop Stories, and there's going to be some interactive pieces as well as some performance pieces. Again, that's going to be on the website, and that's in cooperation with just across the city, United Way agencies, with MedStar Health. So we're doing what we're doing to get the word out. Prevention education are going out to groups, whether again it's Hadassah or Meyerberg. There's a couple of programs we do for the younger, really young kids. Be Well, as in be well, and that's for preschoolers. And we teach mindfulness techniques at the level that they can handle. So breathing techniques as you have a cup of hot cocoa, blow it, but not too hard because you don't want to spill it and burn your fingers. So we have Be Well. And then for us adults and for high schoolers and college age, we have Be Well, which is a combination of mindfulness techniques, yoga, strategies on how to change your thinking that's not so productive. So we have those programs available too, as well as a program that I do, week-long series. It's called Calming Our Nerves, Lifting Our Spirits. And then for organizations who do one-time things, creating calm in the storm. This is the need in the community right now. Excuse me.
Well, this has been great. You've gotten the word out to about 3,000. Typically, we get about 3,000 views between YouTube and Facebook and wherever the heck else Jonathan sends it out.
Thank you.
But I heard last week we had about 4,000. Is that right? With
last week was a great
schools. People really wanted to hear what the schools were planning to deal with the pandemic. So you've gotten the word out. Give the phone number one more time, and then I'm going to turn it over to
410. That part everybody knows. 466-9200. or just go online, JCS Baltimore, Google it, you're there.
Sounds great. Howard, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Keep doing what you're doing.
Beth?
Yeah, thank you, Howard. Really just this was helpful to calm our nerves and raise our spirits. I will say the greatest gift a friend who is a psychiatrist gave me, and this was before the pandemic. I was feeling down. I said, I really think I'm depressed, which was sort of a new emotion to me, I'm happy to say. And he said to me, no, you're not depressed. You're sad with good reason. And it's been extremely helpful to think of it in that way, that when there is a real reason out there, I find it easier to cope with that, because it's not like there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with the world. And I just need help to maneuver around it. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. And I'm going to let everybody know about the upcoming program sponsored by Jewish Community Services in conjunction with Sal Levinson and Brothers, the Baltimore Board of Rabbis, the Baltimore Jewish Council, and the Associated. It's on September 10th at 7 p.m. It's called Mourning Together, a virtual community gathering, a memorial service, and grief program. So you can learn more at Howard's favorite address, jcsbaltimore.org. And I hope everyone will join us next Tuesday, September 1st at noon for another great show. In the meantime, yeah, I'm sorry, Jonathan.
Just to interrupt you with a late programming note about next Tuesday's show. So we have just booked Rabbi Dana Sorokin from the Soul Center at Bethel, who will be talking about spirituality as we usher in the high holidays later in September.
That is so exciting. So now I know everyone's going to join us next Tuesday, September 1st at noon for Rabbi Dana Sorokin. That I know will be another great show. And in the meantime, please visit associated.org and jmoreliving.com for more information, stories, and resources. And until we meet again, everyone, please stay well.
Thanks all.